Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, first video for Unit 1, 1607 to 1754. Those monumental colonial years. Colonial period's always good for the College Board. They always pick an essay question with that. At least under the old system they did. Under the new system, probably not as reliable. But I've got my study guide sitting on my laptop right there. I forgot a copy in the classroom and I'm at home. So in order to do the video, I'm going to have to glance over there once in a while like this. And I'm going to try and make it as less obvious as possible. Least obvious as possible. Whatever. History, not English. Alright, so it starts off on our study guide here talking about Jamestown and the problems of the early people at Jamestown. Now, the guys who came to Jamestown thought they were going to be able to put a shovel in the ground and find gold, and that's what they spent the majority of their early time doing, unfortunately. That and dying. Dying of dysentery, dying of being shot by Native Americans, dying of a general lack of food and an overall lack of welfare and bad water and bad climate and heat. And really, man, what a horrible spot they picked. Jamestown really could not have been worse for the settlers. It was a complete flop in that sense. Unfortunately for them, huge numbers of people died in the initial years, and it's only the advent of tobacco farming and discipline that really saved the colony from certain doom. Looking at our study guide, a joint stock company. A joint stock company is a middle-class method of getting involved in the exploration world. We take a bunch of people who have a little bit of money and we pull that together in order to invest to make a company that can then go into exploration. So for instance, the Virginia Company is a joint stock company. Now that's not necessarily saying that the guys who invested in it are middle class guys. A lot of them are pretty wealthy, but it's joint stock in that if we hit it rich in Virginia, if it turns out to be a gold mine, then the people who are going to make out rich are the initial people who invested, not necessarily the settlers themselves. If you came on that ship in 1607, you were here to try and make money for that company. You were working for them. A headright. In order to encourage settlement to the Virginia colony, the early founders offered a headright, an award of land, 50 acres of land, for each individual and each additional individual that you brought with you after that. So for instance, if you're a head of household and you're bringing over people, it's a good way to start racking up the acreage. Keep in mind, Europe, there's not much extra land to be had, especially not in 50-acre chunks. So the Americas, although it's going to kill you at a rate of 28% of the population dying every year in the Chesapeake, it might be a great option for you. Might be. Particularly if you're like hardy, if you don't die easily. I don't know if you would know that though. Take your chances, roll the dice. Alright, the House of Burgesses, formed in 1619, the first legislative body of the New World. The House of Burgesses offered representative government, in a sense, to the people living in the Virginia colony. What it did was assure that there was some form of legislative government going on a day-to-day basis. Now, the Crown still owns the colony. Keep in mind, this is still an English colony, and over time we'll be reminded of that time and time and time again by the English. But it is an early institution of government. Heading down to that little chart that I've got there, Jamestown, founded 1607. Motives? Gold, baby. Unfortunately, it was not about making it rain. It was mostly about making it pain, and they had a lot of it. Early problems, I listed them earlier. That box isn't big enough to contain them. It was bad. Okay, Maryland, founded in 1633 and 34. Motives, it's a Catholic haven. You don't know this yet, but by 1633, if you look at the scoreboard of the world in the Americas, there aren't a lot of English Catholic colonies. In fact, there are none. In 1607, Jamestown, Anglican. 1620, Plymouth, Pilgrims. 1630, Massachusetts Bay, Congregationalists, or Puritans as we call them. All of those are Protestants. Maryland is supposed to be the Catholic counterbalance, if you will. It provides a little bit of a place of a haven for Catholics. Early problems, not very many Catholics. So you had the rules rigged to sort of help out the Catholic population, and yet most of the settlers were Protestants. They had to check that and change that in the 1640s. As we go down the list here, I'm going to jump ahead. We're going to jump ahead onto the next page, and then we'll come back, I promise. So let's look at how did the indentured servitude system work. An indentured servant is someone who is given the opportunity to come over to the New World and work for a period of generally 4 or 5 years. You sign a work contract. The person who brings you over pays for you to come over and is granted a head right for having provided you, across the way. You're basically worth 50 acres of land. Now, over the next 4 or 5 years, you work for that person. Generally speaking, doing tobacco work or some sort of agricultural labor. If you make it through, and generally speaking, the number of people who made it through was very low, if you make it through, on the other side, there should be waiting for you some land, some tobacco, or some sort of agricultural commodity, tools, instruction, almost a mentorship program. What did it turn out being really? An opportunity for people to come out to the New World, and a lot of them died, unfortunately. Indentures were ridiculously hard worked. Explain how tobacco influenced the economy of the Chesapeake. The economy began to really thrive once tobacco was introduced in 1620. It is the savior crop of the area. So they didn't find gold, but they did find smoke gold. That's not even funny, Holliday. That's not even close to a joke. It's like an anti-joke. Smoke gold? Work on it. All right. The slave culture. As indentured servitude becomes more and more of a problem, the settlers of the Jamestown colony began to realize that there were a lot of problems with indentured servitude. Number one, the individuals tended to die. Number two, those that lived tended to be politically active, vocal, and troublesome. Number three, African laborers working in the area, generally speaking, were able to accomplish more in a day than the indentures. Over time, there's a preference towards African slavery over indentured servitude. Where people lived. The civilization tended to be spread out. That is true of both Chesapeake colonies. It's important for us to make this distinguishing characteristic here, is that the Chesapeake, when we use that phrase, we're talking about both Virginia and Maryland. Both of them are tobacco colonies. Both are going to really thrive on the early advent of tobacco farming, and it makes for a spread out civilization. Tobacco is a land-hungry crop. This gets us into the next question here too, but I'm going to go with it. As you plant tobacco, it depletes, the soil of its nutrients, and it forces you to push further and further into the American interior in order to find viable tobacco land. Now, that means you're going to come into conflict with Native Americans, and that's going to make the colonial governors angry because they don't want to see any more wars, because wars cost taxes and they don't want to raise taxes, and it's a whole hullabaloo. Let's put it this way, though. The more people that showed up, the further west they wanted to go. The further west they wanted to go, the more problem it caused. As we look at our study, one of the big themes is going to be trouble in the west. West is always where the new people tend to be landing, and because there's so much power seated in the eastern part of the colony, in Jamestown, for instance, in the Virginia colony, the people who lived in the west felt as though they didn't get a fair shake. Okay, let's bounce backward. Plymouth colony, this is back on the chart. Date founded in the location, 1620, it's in New England. Motive? The Pilgrims are separatists. In other words, they believe that the Church of England is done, wrapped, okay? That the continuing Catholic influences in the Anglican faith have ruined the religious equation. They're hardcore. The Pilgrims are, I know we idealize and we're like, oh, Pilgrims, funny hats, Thanksgiving. No. The Pilgrims are religious fanatics in that sense, and they are coming to the New World to stake out a new civilization. Early problems? Not really a ton. We do associate the Plymouth civilization, with the signing of the Mayflower Compact in 1620, kind of the first written form of government in the Western Americas, and we also associate the Pilgrims with that celebration of Thanksgiving. Well done them. My laptop's kind of wigging out here. We have Massachusetts Bay just below them. Massachusetts Bay was founded in 1630. Now, the people there are Puritans, and a Puritan is different from a Pilgrim. A Puritan is someone who believes that the Anglican Church can be purified, that it can be made better. And the way that we're going to make it better is to improve it. Take out some of those Catholic influences and push ourselves more down the road towards Calvinism. When we look at the problems in the early society, we're going to see that anyone who speaks out in that society is going to be punished. People like Roger Williams and Ann Hutchison, who are on the second page of the study guide, we're going to see that both of those individuals speak out against the settlers. Roger Williams is going to be upset about the way they're taking land from the Native Americans. He's going to advocate the separation of church and state. Now, when Thomas Jefferson uses that phrase, a wall of separation between church and state, Jefferson's concerned that his loving world of politics is going to be muddied up with religion. Now, Williams is the other way around. Williams believes that religion is the pure field, and that the muddy world of politics is going to get involved with it and change it. And so what Williams wants is a separation there. He doesn't want the leadership to be both secular and religious. If you want to be the mayor, then be the mayor. If you want to be the pastor, be the pastor. But do not be the pastor and the mayor at the same time. And do not speak to us from the pulpit on Sunday of the laws of man and the laws of God. Make them one and not both. Okay, we can listen to one of them. We can listen to both of them really in different separate occasions, but we cannot listen to both of them here. Ann Hutchison, even better scenario, right? Ann Hutchison is a woman, in case you hadn't guessed with a name like Ann Hutchison. But Hutchison held prayer meetings in her own home. She spoke out against the authorities when it came to scriptural issues, and she questioned their ideas on how people received salvation and grace, and as a result of it, she was banished. So the big problem for my Massachusetts Bay Colony is religious disagreements. Both of those individuals are banished within the first half a dozen years of the settlement being there. It's not as though you had a lot of build-up and then the problems came. The problems came pretty early on. In the next video, we'll continue on towards the next pages. Have a good night, folks.